So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's program to discuss the impacts of climate change on skiing and the ski industry here in Maine, and how we can adapt and take action against climate change. I hope that you are as excited as I am for the snowstorm that we're getting tonight. Finally, some real fresh powder at the slopes, and I hope that you all get out and play in it this weekend. And I hope that you and your families are safe and healthy during this COVID-19 pandemic. We would have loved to have been with you in person tonight for this program, but we appreciate you joining us here online on Zoom instead. My name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is a nonprofit membership organization protecting, restoring, and conserving Maine's environment now and for future generations. For more than 60 years, NRCM has been protecting the places and the way of life that make Maine so special. NRCM harnesses the power of the law, science, and the voices of more than 25,000 supporters statewide and beyond. We have a staff of about 30, and our office is in Augusta, just steps from the State House, which is where we do most of our work. Before we get started with the program this evening, just a couple of notes about the Zoom technology that we're using tonight. I'm sure this far into the pandemic, we're all very familiar with Zoom, but just a couple of reminders. First thing, tonight's webinar is being recorded, and tomorrow you'll get an email from me with a link of the recording. And we hope that you'll share that with your friends and family and ask them to watch as well. Your video and your audio is disabled tonight by design. You'll only be able to hear and see our panelists this evening, who will introduce themselves here momentarily. If you have a question during the program for any of our panelists, please type that question in the Q&A box, which can be found on the lower ribbon of your Zoom screen. And we'll get to your questions at towards the end of the program. So before we turn it over to our panel, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsey Burgoyne, the Director of Policy and Advocacy for Protect Our Winters. Lindsey.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. And thank you all for tuning in and joining us tonight. I also think we've had too many Zooms this year, but hopefully soon enough. My name is Lindsey Burgoyne, as Todd said, and I'm really excited to be here tonight for a few reasons. One is, even though I'm coming at you from Boulder, Colorado tonight, I am from a little town called Reedfield, not too far from the NRCM office in Augusta. And I got my start working in policy at the Maine State House with friends like Todd. So it's really awesome to be here. And I also really started seeing the impacts of climate change firsthand in Maine, and used to go up to Baxter State Park every winter with my dad. All through high school, and year after year started seeing seasons look different, snowpack look different. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I have landed at Protect Our Winters now, as I mentioned, out here in Colorado. I serve as the Director of Policy and Advocacy, and Protect Our Winters helps passionate outdoor people protect the places and the lifestyles they love from climate change. So very similar mission to what you all do at the Natural Resources Council in Maine in terms of protecting place and the way of life and the things we love to do. We do federal and state level work, and we were last in Maine in 2019. We got to spend a day in the State House with one of our alliance members. Our alliance members are ambassadors, and that was with Seth Westcott, which was an awesome experience. We definitely hope to come back. And tonight, I'm really excited to bring you three perspectives from our alliance, more of our ambassadors and our community here. And so we have Troy Murphy, Dr. Seth Campbell, and Carolyn Castaldo. So I'm going to call on each of you to introduce yourselves, and then I'll kick it over to Melanie to get us started from Natural Resources Council of Maine. So Troy, would you like to say hello?
Absolutely. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Troy Murphy. I'm originally from Bethel, Maine, where I went to school at Gould Academy, skied at Sunday River. Just kind of grew up in the area. And then it went on to make the U.S. ski team, competing in mogul skiing, and actually represented Team USA at the 2018 Olympics. So kind of came from humble roots in the hometown of Bethel, but have skied all over the world, and it's like to chat with you today.
Awesome. Thanks, Troy. Seth, do you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Seth Campbell. I'm a professor at the University of Maine in the School of Earth and Climate Sciences and the Climate Change Institute, and I specialize in glaciology. So most of my research has me in places like Alaska, Antarctica, Greenland, any place cold to study changing glacier systems. And believe it or not, a lot of those systems that I study impact Maine. So we'll talk about that a little bit tonight.
Thank you. All right. Last but not least, Carolyn.
Hi guys, thanks so much for having me. I am Carolyn Castaldo. I'm the Director of Communications for Sunday River Resort. For those of you who aren't familiar with Sunday River, we are a 4-season destination resort in Newry, Maine. And we offer skiing, snowboarding, golf, 2 resort hotels, and an inn.
Awesome. Thanks, Carolyn. All right. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie, our moderator tonight. And I'm excited to have you all here and hear these perspectives. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm Melanie Sturm, the Forest and Wildlife Program Director at NRCM. Big thanks to our panelists and for POW for teaming up with us on this webinar. I'm going to be your moderator, and our first question I'm going to throw at Troy. Troy, as you just said, you grew up in Maine skiing at Sunday River. Could you describe what winters used to be like growing up, and then how your professional career advanced, and even how you've seen winters change over the course of your years on the mountain?
Yeah, for sure. Growing up in Bethel was like it was like dreamland. It was like the best place you could ever ask to grow up. When like fall would start to phase out and winter would begin, I just remember there being like so much buzz around town because all of my friends from like Massachusetts and stuff would start coming back up to ski, and yeah, it was just a really fun place to be, a really fun place to grow up. I feel like I used to remember skiing like natural snow, like sometimes even on Halloween. Like I remember one storm where it was maybe like my deepest powder day, and it was on Halloween, and we went to the White Mountains. And it seems like just year after year that's kind of diminished, and it seems like growing up now in Maine, you have to deal with a lot more variable conditions. One day you may get a 3-foot snowstorm, but then the next day it could rain. And so it just seems like it's maybe not as dependable. It's maybe not as kind of magical when in the wintertime and it's cold, it's snowing. Like when I grew up, I just remember it being just such a fun time, so many friends around, and having like reliable conditions that we could start skiing early and ski into the spring. So that's kind of a little bit what I've seen in Maine lately, is just a little bit less dependable conditions. And that kind of rings true across the world. I've been lucky to compete in Japan, skied in Alaska a bunch, in Europe, and you kind of see the same stuff, you know, everywhere, maybe even to a greater extent. We would train every summer in British Columbia on a glacier in the summertime in Whistler. And from when I first started training there, when I was like an athlete, still living in Maine, still competing out of Maine, to the time where I moved out west and joined the ski team, the glacier like fully has receded so far to the point where it's unrecognizable from when you first would start. And they've even had to like move the chairlifts and move the T-bars because they're no longer like on stable ice, no longer on stable glaciers. So yeah, it's just really scary for me to kind of have this being my, you know, my lifestyle and the way I've grown up, and now that's directly threatened. And for me, that's scary because I want other kids to have the same kind of route that I chose. And if that's no longer there, then I just think that's, you know, a real loss for our main winter sport communities.
I bet a lot of folks on the webinar can totally identify with what you're saying. I'm sure many people are familiar with Troy and his career, but in case you're not, we do have a short video that we wanted to play. I'll be quiet so you can hear the audio.
Olympic debut.
He's been a top mogul skier, got a podium this year, has the air package. Oh, nice. Goes for the big back double full off the top. Huge degree of difficulty there, Trace. Extremely difficult on this steep course, and got right back into the moguls. This is an excellent run so far. What does he have in store for us on the bottom jump? Back full off the bottom, good call. Troy Murphy changing it up. What a run, and he is psyched.
A great run by American Troy Murphy, 25.40 Olympic debut.
Awesome. It's fun to have the announcer's enthusiasm because you're so covered up with your goggles. It's hard to read your expression. So Seth, could you corroborate anything that Troy was saying about his experiences with shorter, wetter winters in Maine? I mean, how have Maine winters already changed, and what should we expect in the future?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually going to share my screen because I have a few reports that I want people to be aware of, actually. So stand by for 1 second. So I assume people can see my slides here. Maine has a pretty phenomenal resource of scientists that have been spending a lot of time focused on Maine climate and how climate's changing. So I wanted to make people aware of a few reports. The one on the left here, the scientific assessment of climate change, came out this year, and it's a full 300-page document. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty details of climate change in Maine, that's your document. And then the Maine Climate Council just recently came out with a plan to kind of summarize how we might deal with climate change. That's a bit shorter, much more readable. So I recommend doing a search on these. A couple other reports that I might chime in on. There's another really nice kind of whittling down the science a little bit, this Maine Climate Future report that you can look up. Ivan Fernandez at Maine led this report, but the Climate Change Institute, where I'm housed at, put a lot of time and effort into this. It's a pretty easy read to kind of check out how things have changed. And then this report on the right-hand side was actually from Hubbard Brook Research Station in New Hampshire, looking at changing climate. So I recommend these four, but in general, Troy hit the nail right on the head in terms of how climates are changing, our climate's changing. I'll show a couple of science slides, so bear with me for those of you that don't want to look at figures. But this one is pretty important because it actually summarizes what we've seen in the past and also what we're kind of predicting in the future. So if you have the temperature on the y-axis, so up and down here, and then you have time on the x-axis here from 1900 to 2100. So basically from 2020, we're predicting out what might change. And each of these colors, the red, the green, the blue, are different possible scenarios that might happen. And this black, this dark black, is basically actually instrumental records of how climate's changed in the past. And then the kind of lighter background is kind of a standard error for each of these scenarios. And these colors here represent possible changes as a result of how much greenhouse gas is in the atmosphere. And unfortunately, we're on this trajectory just kind of ramping up to have significant temperature changes over time. And what that does is that has a big impact on snowfall event, number of days that we might have snow. So if we look at a record over the past 100 years, the climate has warmed so much in Maine that in general, a few key points, there's been about 21 fewer snow-covered days in the general area of New England, or 16 fewer days before Christmas of snowmaking days, 18 fewer frost days. These are just some numbers from a couple different reports. So the main take-home point is our season is getting shorter, more condensed from a skiing perspective. So I think that'll probably answer the general question you asked.
Thanks, Seth. So Carolyn, Seth tells us this is real, it's happening. How has climate change impacted Sunday River, and have you had to make any adaptations?
Yeah, so I mean, like you've seen in those graphs, winters are becoming a lot more unpredictable and have been for quite some time. Though our seasons are roughly the same length every year, each year requires different adaptations to ensure successful operations depending on those weather variances. We're typically open for skiing from late October to early May, but this year, for instance, we opened November 23rd because we didn't have those snowmaking temps or early season natural snow like we have had in the past. But I think one thing to kind of point out is we've been making snow since the 1970s, so this isn't a new challenge for us. We were the first in Maine to implement snowmaking equipment into our mountain operations and actually develop proprietary snowmaking equipment in the 80s that you'll see in some spots on the hill today, though it's not as efficient as some of the new technology. In the last 6 years, we've invested around $4 million into new snowmaking equipment and upgrading our system. This includes, energy efficient snow guns like the Boyne Low E-fan guns and some other tower guns that use less water, more water, less air. And we've also begun the process of adding automation into our system. This allows us to power up or shut down at the drop of a hat as temperatures change, and they are changing so regularly. And, in terms of sustainability, snowmaking has been the primary focus for us for a number of years due to the amount of energy that we use to do so. And these new snow guns do certainly make a dent, but there's work to do. Some of that work includes, last February, we announced the Sunday River 2030 plan, in which we committed to having net zero carbon emissions by the year 2030. This is obviously an ambitious goal, but I'm pleased to say that we have a lot of support going into this from our parent company, Boyne Resorts. In January, we will be announcing the Boyne Resorts Future Project. This includes working with an energy provider to have or to use 100% renewable energy by 2030 and looking into solar arrays at the resorts where it makes sense, among many other initiatives. Of course, these will span all of the North American properties for Boyne Resorts, but this is a really great way for us to collaborate as a company and be able to address these issues as they come up and also determine best practices and sort of share a wealth of knowledge. In terms of smaller scale initiatives that don't have to do with snowmaking for sustainability efforts, we have committed to the National Ski Areas Association Climate Challenge and joined Sustainable Slopes. We also send thousands of pounds of compost to the Pleasant River Farm in Bethel. We are the largest provider of compost to this farm. So it's a great way to process our waste, but also support a local business. And a couple of the other things, you know, the typical electric vehicle chargers in our parking lots, eliminating plastic straws from the resort. Due to COVID, we have had to bring back some of the single-use items that we had tried to get rid of in the last few years, but have made an effort to really make sure that all of those are compostable through our Pleasant River Farm initiative. And we're also encouraging forest regrowth by closing off sections of our glades to promote overall tree health. Some of the way that the glades were cut in the past really isn't the best thing for the trees. So this is our way of kind of addressing that, and it helps us to cut better glades moving forward. So those are a few of the things that we've been kind of focusing on, looking at the bigger picture.
That's impressive. Thanks for sharing all that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good work. You know, we do have a video to show of snowmaking, but just before, actually, let's watch that, and I have one more question for you. Makes snowmaking look really magical. I was just going to ask, you know, how do you evaluate the costs that go into making these changes versus the payout that you get, which might not be immediate? Like a lot of ski resorts are probably facing these same questions and dilemmas that Sunday River is. So yeah, how do you prioritize like what changes you can make and what you can't just because of the cost?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, like I said, we've definitely focused on investing in snowmaking. We see an immediate return in that just because we are able to open earlier and provide terrain that people now know that they can depend on when we are able to make snow like that. So that's definitely been a big one. But we're also seeing more and more that it's important to our guests that we are making these efforts. So even something that we're not seeing a direct return on investment right away, we know that the value is there from the guest perspective. So, and of course, for our impact's sake. So it's definitely, you know, we will continue to focus on snowmaking, but we're making sure that those other changes are a priority, even if sometimes they cost a little more than the cheaper alternative that isn't as good for the environment.
Makes sense. Thanks. Troy, going back to you, how have you and other athletes been using your platform to speak out for climate action? You know, a lot of people look up to you, what you say, I'm sure like your fans really trust. So how are you using your voice?
Yeah, I've been super lucky to link up with POW. I think that, you know, it definitely influenced me when I was an athlete before, you know, I was really heavily involved. I was kind of like tunnel vision, focused on competition, but then once people like Jeremy Jones and the Powell Alliance started to kind of like spread the message of, hey, this is our lifestyle, we need to protect it. I think, myself and a lot of other people in the industry kind of like started to turn our heads and look at that, because if you can get like really caught up in just having fun in the lifestyle and skiing and enjoying it, but it's really scary when you start to think about everything that you love, maybe being stripped away or at least being diminished. So for me, getting involved with POW is a huge opportunity. I've been able to attend a few meetings with like senators and lawmakers. One of them this past spring was really cool. Met with a couple lawmakers from Maine, New Hampshire, and Utah, and just kind of talking about clean energy initiatives that we were hoping to push for kind of in the wake of COVID. So trying to rebuild with renewables rather than kind of just rebuilding what we had before, because obviously not working super well. But yeah, I think it's really been just about the ski community having voices like Protect Our Winters, kind of like starting the movement. And now when I look around at all my peers and even the people that I still look up to or follow in the industry, it's much more prominent to see people pushing Protect Our Winters initiatives, pushing just kind of like clean or green living, just trying to be sustainable and be a little bit more thoughtful with our choices. So I think it starts with from the top down. I think folks like myself have to try to make the changes where we can and advocate where we can, and hopefully the people who kind of follow us along will jump in. And I think that's been happening. It's been really cool to see. Most of anytime I post something power related, there's always like a couple controversial comments, but for the most part it's like really uplifting. People are super stoked and want to get involved. So it's been really cool from my perspective. I feel really fortunate to be able to join this crew.
That's great. I think you're setting a wonderful example. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah,
I don't think one ski video was enough. So we have another one to show you all really quick. Looks like you were having a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm very lucky.
So Seth, Troy was talking about how he uses his platform, his following, and his time really to advocate for climate advocacy. But you as a scientist also have a similar role in, disseminating information about climate change. So what role do you see scientists playing in all this?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. I think probably 80% of my job these days is disseminating the science to the public, to students. I feel like I spend less and less time actually doing the research and actually just informing people about what we're actually seeing. I'm actually going to share my slides again, just because I think this question kind of hits at the heart for some of the stuff that I do. I am not a skier. I am a climber. So I spend a lot of time on ice climbing in Maine, Alaska, other places. I do ski a little bit, but I'm certainly not at the level of Troy. But one thing that I spent a lot of time doing, as I mentioned, is kind of communicating with the public. One of the programs that I work with, it's called the Juneau Icefield Research Program. We have scientists working together from around the world, and students actually working with us as well on the ice field, doing research together, kind of learning together. And I think that's one of the important messages that I can pass along to people, is that unfortunately climate change doesn't really know political borders. So I think it's really important for Maine, in a way, to lead the way in terms of what we do from a climate perspective here in Maine. But we also have to work pretty hard to make sure we get our message out, to get our technologies out that we're developing in the state, because climate impacts Maine from across the globe. So, a lot of the work that I do, I work on glaciers around the planet. So Alaska, working with students and other scientists, to Canada. We have a project with colleagues from Canada next year to Mount Logan. We've done a lot of work in Denali National Park looking at climate change from ice core records. So a lot of the climate information we know about the Arctic comes from ice core climate science. And Arctic processes have a huge influence on Maine. So the changes in sea ice, changes in Arctic atmospheric processes have a big influence on what we actually see in terms of unpredictability of Maine weather in the future. And I also do a lot of work in Antarctica. Antarctica is broken up into West Antarctica and East Antarctica, and there's concern about major parts of West Antarctica kind of breaking down, and that would be pretty significant in terms of potential sea level rise. You're talking meters of sea level rise, and with Maine being a coastal state, that could be pretty catastrophic for the state of Maine. So there's a lot of, we call them teleconnections, between Maine and other places of the world. And so I think, my role is kind of looking at those teleconnections, those relationships between other parts of the world, and bringing that back to the broader community, to kind of inform our community, as well as our folks that are focusing on the policy. I don't dive into policy too much because it's pretty complex, but that said, from a personal perspective, not speaking from UMaine's perspective, I think this is pretty critical of scientists nowadays to kind of get involved in that conversation, to be at the table as policy is being discussed. Because the reality is, Maine's climate, Maine's entire economy is dependent on our environment. And there's a lot of changes we're seeing, everything from agricultural changes, forestry, the winter changes that we're seeing, ocean fisheries, ocean warming. All of that is a big part of our economy. So I think it's important for us as scientists to kind of be at that table.
Yeah, on that note, Carolyn, I think a lot of, thinking about the stakes that climate change has on our personal lives, it hits home pretty quickly. But what about what's at stake for Maine's economy? I mean, what role does winter recreation play in our economy, and what value do ski resorts have for our communities?
Absolutely. So Maine's alpine and Nordic skiing resorts generate an estimated 300 million per year. And that's an average, of course, but it's definitely critical. Outdoor recreation in general makes up 4.8% of Maine's economy, which is more than double the national average. And it supports 40,000 jobs in Maine. So that's 6.4% of Maine's total employment. This is, of course, looking at the entire outdoor rec industry, but with skiing being such a large part of the winter economy and the winter outdoor rec options, it's definitely kind of scary to think about what could happen down the road if we don't take charge of the situation. Thinking close to home for me in Bethel, the tourism market is really what brings people to the area. Bethel has a population of about 2,500 people, maybe a little bit more. And that population can't support the restaurants, retail, real estate market that's just been such a big part and sort of an ancillary piece of having a major ski area in this town.
Thanks. So we're going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. anyone, feel free to type questions in to the Q&A box. It's in the bottom center of your Zoom screen. We got a few though already. Troy, there's a question about whether you could tell a story about talking with legislators. Like, do any specific stories come to mind where you felt like what you were saying really affected them, or where maybe even the opposite, where you were just like not getting through to someone? Talking about legislators.
Yeah. No, I think it was a really cool experience because everyone was super receptive. It was a panel like this. Seth was on the chats with myself, and we had a few other athletes and scientists. And you know, from my end of things, they were all like very open and willing to hear our stories. I think they really like to hear like anecdotal stuff from people who are, you know, high up in the ski industry, or people like Seth who really know what they're talking about when it comes to science. Because at the end of the day, they're kind of just people like you and me. You know what I mean? They're supposed to be advocates for the people living in their states, and they want to know how they can help those people in their state. Obviously, things get a little tricky when it comes to, you know, party lines and things like that. But from my end, I think everybody was on the same page that these are definitely issues, and they were at least willing to have conversations and try to think about solutions, whether that being, you know, jumping on board with what we were asking or not. At least people are attentive and kind of like eyes wide open, trying to find some solutions in the long run. So I thought it was really cool. I thought it was a really positive experience. It was my first time doing that. Usually I think it's in Washington, and so it would have been cool to do that in person. But part of the nice thing about being on Zoom is we could have a lot more people on those panels, and we could chat with people, you know, directly in our where we're from in our state. So yeah, it was a really cool experience. I was super fortunate to do it, and it was nice to have people like Seth there to back us up with the actual science, because sometimes skiers, you know, we like snow, but we don't really know what's going on with it. So yeah, it was cool.
Nice. Yeah, it takes both. Carolyn, I think you said the parent company for Sunday River is Boyne. There's a question about that. Does Boyne hope to use their industry position to establish relationships with politicians, emphasizing the importance of alternative energies on a state or national scale?
Absolutely. So we currently do that right now to a certain extent. We have some really great national and local associations. We're part of the National Ski Areas Association that has an entire arm for lobbying, which is very helpful. And of course, we do have a seat on the board there. So that's definitely something that is going to be crucial in the future. And, you know, it's something that we look at currently through those associations and through being part of organizations like POW.
Awesome. 2 questions for Seth, science questions. Number 1, do or will current and looming challenges in the Arctic and Antarctic have any predictable impact on Maine climate?
That's a good question. And actually, I think I saw who asked that. I have to chime in. I feel like this is makes me chuckle because that was asked by my old grade school science teacher, which is always fun. So hi, Ken, or Mr. Williams. Yeah, I mean, actually, I think the big challenge we run into right now is actually the unpredictability that's going to be caused. And one of the things that's happening is as the Arctic is experiencing what we call the Arctic amplification of warming, and as that Arctic warms, it actually causes kind of a weeble wobble effect of the Arctic front dipping down. So you have these rapid cold events supplemented with warm events. We're expecting more variable rain events and drought events. So like this summer was a huge drought event. We were actually in extreme ranges in some areas of the state of Maine as a result of not having rain for 30 days or more, I think. You know, so that supplemented with huge intensity rainfall events where you get, you know, large 2-3 inches of rain. That's a challenge to deal with from an economic perspective, you know, thinking about how that might play out for farmers and forestry, you know, and then of course, the winter is really taking the biggest hit, I think, you know, in terms of how the precipitation falls. It's falling as rainwater as opposed to snow, right? And that's one of the things, obviously, the big topic of today. So yeah, we know those things are going to happen, but it's the unpredictability is a challenge, and that's one of the things we're still trying to get at. There's a lot of research to do in that.
And then the second question was about what was the unit of measure in sea level change with a potential high of 8?
Oh yeah, that's feet, which is pretty significant. So if we're at the high end of sea level rise, there's a pretty big risk to a lot of Maine communities in terms of just sea level rise itself. Maine is at pretty high risk in general, but then think about things like storm surges. So Portland would be very much at risk. A lot of the coastal communities would be very much at risk of that.
Question to any of you who feel like answering it. Comment, then question. Maine once had dozens and dozens of small local ski areas. For big ski areas like Sunday River and Sugarloaf with the ability to invest in snowmaking, the future may be not as threatening, as fast, but what about the small ski areas that still exist on the margins that are important for their communities?
The Maine ski area or ski industry is pretty tight-knit. We often will recycle materials and things like chairlifts to smaller resorts. Of course, they purchase them, but it's a used equipment, and it's a great way for us to all kind of be moving forward together. There are also quite a few grants out there for energy efficiency upgrades. So snowmaking does qualify for some of those if they're able to take advantage, which most should be.
Thanks. And another question for anyone, how frequently do you get the opportunity to converse with or present to school-aged Mainers? And I'll tack on to that Troy, I think you give ski lessons, and I'm kind of curious if you ever have conversations that are not just about skills and technique.
Yeah. I was actually the head coach of the Park City ski team last winter, and definitely tried to kind of, just have my kids at least be aware of what was going on with climate change and, how it affects skiing. I have not, I joined POW just 2 winters ago, and I think, all of our energy has been kind of focused on, for the most part, this past election. And so I think it's been more kind of geared toward that side of things. But I think historically POW has done a lot of stuff with presenting to kids. I think they had a program called Hot Planet Cool Athletes or something like that. And so hopefully now that we're kind of past the craziness, and obviously this year has been extra crazy, but hopefully kind of when we get on the other end of this, we can kind of go back to those a little more engaging with community initiatives and talking to kids and presenting in those scenarios, because I would love to have that opportunity, and I think that can be really impactful.
Seth, your job is teaching. Have you seen any trend or change in interest for students who are entering your program at UMaine?
I think in general, there's a trend for students in general to be less focused on what they want to do for a career and more focused on making an impact, making a positive impact. And science nowadays is not centric to one field. The program I'm in is the School of Earth and Climate Sciences, and I always, it's the term of Earth system science. All these systems kind of work together, and having a general understanding of all these systems is pretty important for tackling the problems we have. And I think, so that's one trend, that students are generally focused on systems and generally focused on trying to come up with solutions for the issues we're facing. I think the other trend that I've noticed in the past few years, maybe 10 years ago, in some instances that I approached kind of larger organizations about climate change and trying to deal with the climate issues and the environmental challenges we're facing head on, that was a pretty divisive issue. And I think, certain organizations are really stepping up to the front, so stuff like this, like working with Troy, where, Troy and other athletes that have this really, bigger platform. Scientists like me, we don't have a platform really. We're pretty minimal in terms of our platform, but when we can work with people to kind of get the word out about the science that we're doing, I think that's been a new trend. So Protect Our Winters has kind of stepped up to the plate, obviously. Another group that I'm involved with, American Alpine Club, has stepped up to the plate. I'm on their climate task force to kind of, for their groups. They actually put a poll out, I think, last year, and I think 90% of their members, of the 26,000 members, were keen on seeing climate action. So, I think organizations are starting to step up more so these days. And I think that's really important because we need to do a better job working together to deal with some of these issues.
Yeah, here. Well, we have a few more questions, but you know, I don't want to lose anyone, or I don't want anyone to lose the opportunity to see a video of Donnie Pelletier. But before we cue that up, Troy, could you just explain who that person is?
Yeah, Donnie Pelletier is a friend of mine. He is Maine's finest athlete. You know, kind of born and raised on white heat at Sunday River, as the legend has it. But really, he's just a jack of all trades. You know, true, you know, Maine guy through and through. He can do it all, whether it's skiing or water, you know, anything. You know, he's just very talented in whether it's talking about climate stuff or skiing or fishing, you know, whatever it may be. Seth actually had the opportunity to kind of like school him a little bit on the climate side of things this summer. And so that may be what we're gonna see in a second here.
For the state, but as you get further north, you know, 30, 40, 50 years, but in these smaller areas down south, you know, 15, 20, 30 years is probably what you're pushing at.
I mean, they're going to have to start dumping tons of money into snowmaking and that whole deal. I mean, we were just talking to the guy down here in Lost Valley. He said he had friggin' this snowmaking every friggin' time they can just because they need to stockpile it because they never know when a friggin' warm-up's going to come and hit.
Yeah, he said when they get 3 feet of snow at Sugarloaf, they get 6 inches here.
Yeah.
They really rely on the snowmaking here.
So Seth, I mean, the winter months for me, I mean, that's where I really thrive. You know, I'm pretty much riding my ski-doo to the mountain, skiing all day, then riding my ski-doo over to the ice rink in Rumford, doing a little bit of hockey on the rink, and then riding home. Seems like that, you know, things I like to do are really at risk here. I mean, we're talking a lot of money in it too. So, I mean, what are the figures we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think the current figures for the ski industry in Maine are about $300 million revenue coming into the state. And I think the snowmobiling industry is over $200 million. So you're looking at $500 million of funding coming into the state just from those two activities alone.
Gee, that's quite a big chunk of change. I mean, I ain't seen that kind of money come across my desk anytime soon, but I mean, we need that for Maine's economy. I mean, I think it's big. I mean, obviously, some months got a big portion of that tourism dollars, but you know, you got to keep it going in the winter months too.
Tourism industry, whether winter or summer, is a big piece of the pie for revenue in the state of Maine, and the winter has a really large component of it.
Right.
It's a big take home.
Right, and it ain't just the resorts, right? It ain't just the big ones or the small mom and pop shops. It kind of trickles down right into the community. I mean, folks got to be able to, you know, buy Moxie and red snappers for their kids and put food on the table and that whole deal. And
there's thousands of jobs that are impacted by it.
Right, so I mean, we really got to start thinking about this one pretty hard.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, well, me and Seth are out here at friggin' Lost Valley, you know, before the snowmaking starts.
So,
Donnie's pretty goofy, but Seth had Crocs on, so that was goofy too.
I think it fit well with Donnie's boots versus my Crocs. I was gonna say that actually that brought it. That was a fun event to do with Donnie. But Lost Valley was neat. We checked out their brewery, and they were saying that, you know, one of the things that they've done is that diversification. You know, and the brewery, you know, is almost as busy as the actual, you know, Lost Valley event. I think that's pretty important. I assume, Carolyn, you can probably speak to that. Like, that diversification is probably pretty important for you all too, right?
Absolutely. We just purchased a golf course. So, you know, I think it's about adding, not just having a diverse offering, but also being able to offer more year-round employment opportunities too. So there are some benefits outside of, you know, the climate impacts that definitely weigh into that decision. But if you look through our 2030 plan, you'll see, you know, we have a mountain coaster on there. We need to look at ways that we can still kind of bring people to the area so they can experience Western Maine and all the amazing things here, even if there is less snow.
I wanted, you know, we're getting some questions in, but I wanted to give a shout out to someone named Roger who is who's listening today. And he said he's been skiing for 70 years. And so even though we can't hear from him, I'm sure he could paint a very clear picture about how ski seasons have changed. So thanks for listening, Roger.
Actually, and Roger mentions a cool website, the New England Lost Ski Areas Project. I can't remember what it is, but I want to say it's like 500 or 400 ski, kind of smaller ski resorts that have been shut down over the years. And I'm sure not all of it's related to climate change, but it's a pretty phenomenal resource that Roger mentions. It's worth looking up if anyone's interested.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. A question for anyone. What do the deniers of global warming say to justify their positions? Do they have fake science, Seth?
This is a question that this is the question that we get all the time, in terms of the fake science nowadays. Generally speaking, it includes everything from we're in cahoots with each other. Where if you have, generally speaking, it's trying to combat the scientists that are doing the work in general. I feel like the reality is, if anyone actually sat in a lab meeting with scientists discussing the science and how science actually works from a peer review process, I think folks would realize that it would be really hard for us to pull the wool over anyone's eyes in terms of what we say. It's virtually impossible with the way science works, because what I put out, basically every other scientist is trying to refute and trying to tackle and poke holes in it. And the main point is that we've gotten to a point where we can't poke holes in most of the science issues. Now, there's always science out there that needs more research in terms of, well, we're not quite able to explain this one little piece of information. So for example, as we try to predict the future of Maine and how the Maine oceans might warm, there's a lot of complexities associated with that, such as how the ocean circulation moves around in the Gulf of Maine, how the Gulf Stream from the more mid-latitude regions works its way north, and how the water from the Greenland works its way south, and how that water intermixes. So, we can make predictions, but our predictions are only as good as some of the observations we have now, and predicting stuff is pretty hard, as everyone knows. So, there's a lot of folks out there trying to poke holes in the stuff that we do, but I think one key take-home point that I like to tell people is the climate system of what we see. We basically are able to fingerprint causes of what's happening in the climate. And so it's just like your fingerprint that you have. If you put your finger on a door handle, I can tell it's you, and that fingerprint comes from you, nowhere else. We can do the same thing with some of the climate features that are occurring nowadays, from greenhouse gases, from volcanics, stuff like that. So I think it's important to kind of the take-home point is that we have a solid understanding of a lot of these systems nowadays. So it's really hard to poke holes in what we do nowadays.
I'd love to jump in on that one too. For those that are interested, there's a really cool new film from Jeremy Jones and POW, I think a couple other people, called Purple Mountains. And it's about Jeremy, who's the POW founder, kind of going into the mountains with people who are maybe not full-blown climate deniers, but I might call them skeptics. And you can kind of see how he approaches those conversations and tries to find some common ground with those folks. And at the end of the day, what it really seems like is there are like the huge figurehead media climate deniers that are you may find in the news or wherever that are maybe just not very logical or reasonable, and they're cherry picking a lot of data and kind of trying to convey their message. But I think that a lot of people that you and I would encounter are maybe more of those skeptics who don't really know what to think. And that's where I think conversations like this can actually have a little bit of a difference. So for any of those who want to check it out, it's probably like a 40-minute film or so. Definitely worth a watch. Purple Mountains, check it out.
We can actually follow up to all webinar attendees by email with a link to that film. It's great.
I would say it was one of the best films I've seen, and I think it really does send an important message of trying to. I think 90% of the people out there actually understand there's science behind what we're seeing, and I think Troy hits the nail on the head, and I think that film does a really good job of trying to bring people together on the topic.
Thanks. Carolyn, there's a question that I think you alluded to earlier about all Maine ski resorts kind of helping each other out. I don't remember your exact phrasing, but there's a question here about how Maine's climate situation compares to other New England states. So just curious if you're sharing what you're doing with ski resorts in other states, and if you're learning lessons that way, because I would assume Maine skiing, New England skiing has a brand. So if, one state benefits, the other might too.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, there's National Ski Areas Association. There are also a lot of state level associations. So Maine has its own Ski Maine Association that many of our ski areas are a part of. They do legislation work in addition to, a number of other things, but they work very closely with Ski New Hampshire, Ski Vermont, and other representatives there. And I know that many, of those associations have sent delegates to Washington on these topics. So without the ski areas necessarily kind of getting together to say, how do we fix this? We're working together through those channels. And I will just reiterate too that it's such a great part about being part of a larger ski resort company. We're able to sort of lean on our counterparts in Big Sky, Montana, and Brighton, Utah, and those places to really kind of get a more nationwide perspective on what's going on.
Awesome. Maine the governor of Maine, Janet Mills, just released a climate action plan called Maine Won't Wait. And it's a 4-year plan, includes a lot of actions that Maine will take to curb our emissions, transform our energy sector. Carolyn, have you and your team been tracking that at all? Because your ski resort obviously uses electricity. One of the webinar watchers was wondering if you take that into, how involved you get with energy or electricity sourcing.
We get pretty involved. We have our snowmaking manager is really kind of responsible for energy use across the resort, which is kind of interesting. But if you think about how much energy snowmaking uses, it makes sense. He works with a consulting company basically to look at when we should be buying power and how it pertains to overall use across the state. So sometimes if it's the coldest night of the winter, we won't be making snow because it's the highest demand within the state. And so we're kind of giving back in a way by not using that energy. So that's just one of the ways that we kind of track that. And of course, like I mentioned, Ski Maine is kind of keeping an eye on stuff from the lobbying side and, the legislative side. So we definitely work closely with them on anything coming from the state regarding energy. So yeah, that's kind of a quick overview.
Todd is back to actually talk a little bit more about the climate action plan. Todd, what can you tell us?
Yeah, hi everybody. This is a really exciting time for climate action here in Maine. As many of the viewers probably know, for the past, actually more than 12 months, the Maine Climate Council has been meeting and the working groups have been meeting to develop a 4-year climate action plan for Maine. And Governor Mills publicly released the climate action plan called Maine Won't Wait on December 1st. And it is the most significant roadmap to climate action that we've seen here in Maine. And it contains a lot of really exciting proposals to dramatically reduce Maine's carbon emissions. A bill passed the legislature last year, which NRCM helped pass, where Maine is required by statute to reduce our emissions 45% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. We need serious action here at the state level to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And this plan is a great roadmap to get us there. Just some of the high points of the report are really electrifying our transportation sector. Emissions from our cars and trucks makes up about 54% of the greenhouse gas emissions here in Maine. So we really need to reduce our carbon emissions coming from our cars and trucks. And the Climate Action Plan is proposing a dramatic increase in the use of electric vehicles here in Maine. and providing some additional rebates for electric vehicles to help more Mainers all around the state drive electric. The Climate Action Plan is also calling for significant investment in public transportation. Currently, Maine invests about 82 cents per capita on public transportation compared to Vermont, which is investing about $11 or $12 per capita in public transit. So the plan proposes to increase public transit spending to $5 per capita. That's going to help get people around Maine on buses in public transit much more efficiently and in higher volumes than they are now. I won't get into too many more details, but a few other highlights are significant increase in weatherizing Maine homes. As we all probably know, Maine has a very old housing stock, and we're the most heating oil dependent state in the country. So there are massive investments proposed in weatherizing our homes, but also converting our heating systems to electric with electric heat pumps. And as most of us probably know, the governor has a 100,000 heat pump challenge over the next 5 years. The last thing that I'll mention coming out of the Climate Action Plan are natural climate solutions. So really protecting Maine's forests and protecting Maine's forests to sequester more carbon and making sure that we protect our forests and our coastline to sequester more carbon. So it's extremely exciting. It's going to result in many bills in the legislature. The legislative session starts in just a couple of weeks, and NRCM will be working hard to pass those bills. We're going to need all of your help, so we'll stay in touch with when those hearings are coming up and when we could use your help. So it's really exciting. It's a really exciting time for climate action here in Maine.
Thanks, Todd. And before you wrap us up, inquiring minds would like to know how much longer Troy will be skiing professionally.
So I stopped competing after the Olympics in 2018, but try to still keep my irons in the fire. These days, more skiing in the backcountry. So whether it's hiking or snowmobiling or even just skiing inbounds, trying to do more of like the big mountain type stuff than the mogul skiing. That takes a toll on your body after a while. But yeah, still ski. I don't know, almost every day. I've been out every day this week so far. So yeah, it's definitely my passion. I'll be doing it forever.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Todd, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, just want to say big thanks to our panel tonight. Troy, thanks so much for all you do and for advocating for climate action and using your platform and your voice. And thanks for getting your friend Donnie involved too. He's an effective advocate that we all need right now, and some good comic relief. So thanks for getting Donnie involved too.
Yeah, my pleasure. And also thanks to Seth, because anytime that I can't answer questions, he's there to back me up with the real answer. So I appreciate all of his work. And also Carolyn, I think Sunday River's doing an amazing job with that plan that she outlined earlier. And obviously I'm biased, but that's home for me, and that's my favorite resort ever. So yeah, I'm just like to be on this call, and thank you all for hosting.
Absolutely. Seth, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for teaching the next generation of climate leaders in your classes. And thanks for all your hard work and your research out in the field, and for sharing your research with us here tonight. And I hope you have fun ice climbing this weekend. I think you said you were going to the Grafton Notch.
Yeah, I think we might go in that area. Yeah, thanks for having me tonight. And for those listening, you can easily reach me at the Climate Change Institute if you just go online and look up my name. Happy to answer questions. I did say one question there, asking about what you can do. Educate yourself. And those first few slides that I showed earlier are really good reports. Email me if you want to find the links. I can certainly pass those along.
Great, thanks, Seth. And Carolyn, thanks so much for joining us tonight and for helping run an awesome ski mountain. Some of the best skiing days I've ever had in my life we're at Sunday River. So looking forward to getting out there this winter, and thanks again for all you do.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It's a great opportunity, and we're looking forward to kind of growing and learning more with all of you.